Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Chef AJ, and you're listening to Healthy Living with Chef AJ. I'm so honored to have our guest tonight, Brian Wansink. I am such a fan of his work, and I have listened to his first book, Mindless Eating, over and over and recommend it to all my clients. He has a new book out now called Slim by Design, Mindless Eating Solutions for Everyday Life. He's the author of over 100 academic articles and several books. And Brian, I'm just such a fan of your work, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be with you tonight.
And I just, it sounds like you have one of the funnest jobs in the world. You know, that food lab. Tell us a little bit, because there's some of my listeners may not be familiar with your work. So why don't you just take as much time as you want telling us who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, it's called the Cornell Food and Brand Lab, and so I'm a professor who studies eating behavior. That's all I've done for 25 years is to figure out why we eat what we eat, why we eat how much, why we like it or why we don't like it, but more importantly, what we can do, what tools we can use to change things so we get out of our food ruts, that we eat better, so that we enjoy food more and are better cooks. And what I have is something called, it's the Cornell Food and Brand Lab, and it looks exactly like your house looks.
Wow.
If your house had one-way mirrors in it, and if it had hidden cameras, if it had scales under tables. And what we do is we bring people in and we change things. We might change the lighting. We might change whether they have a good conversation or bad conversation with the person next to them. We might change the size of their plate or how the kitchen's laid out. We see how it influences what they eat, how much they eat, and how much they like it. And the cool thing about this is that it not only tells us what sort of things trip us up, but it also tells us, very importantly, the really easy changes you can make to eat less, eat better. Let me give you a cool example of something we just a study we just did just a short time ago. Actually, I have a little sidebar in the book Slim by Design. But we a lot of people have fairly cluttered kitchens. A male sitting out. With that, how does a cluttered kitchen influence you? So what we did is we took our kitchen, we brought people in there, and we had 3 snacks sitting out, and for half the people when they came in, it was 3 snacks, but the rest of the room was perfectly clear. There were no mail, there were no dirty dishes or anything. For the other people who came in, the kitchen looked like a lot of kitchens. There's some dirty dishes in the sink. There's some others in a rack. There's some mail sitting on the counter. There's an open newspaper. And we found as people were in this cluttered kitchen, on average, they ate 44% more snacks just in half an hour's time.
That's crazy. So it's a good thing to clean up, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. And that's it. For 25 years, we've done studies just all point toward here's things you can do you never would have thought about that can help you eat just a little bit better, a little bit less.
Do you design these studies by yourself? Like, do you just go home one night and think, okay? I mean, do you engineer these studies? Do you think about what you're going to do and make these up? And because they sound fascinating, I'd love to come to your lab and be a subject.
Oh, I'd love to have you come visit, or come for a weekend. You can stay. Yeah. We can come to a lot of these myself, but then also I've got tons of creative people who come and visit. What we do is I used to have this Noah's Ark philosophy where I said we're not have more than 2 people of any one background. So I might have 2 anthropologists and 2 psychologists and 2 sociologists, and when you get that weirdo mix of people, and man, you come up with the great things. So today, this is kind of funny. We're at this retreat today, and there's a guy who's in my lab. He's visiting for a year. He's from Sao Paulo. He's 40 years old. He'd been a journalist, and now then he got his Ph.D. And he's working his computer, and he's using his mouse with his left hand. I said, Gustavo, I've known you for almost a year, and I didn't know you were left-handed. And he goes, well, I'm not. I said, why are you using your left hand for your mouse? And he says, it helps me be more creative.
Interesting.
Isn't that crazy?
Can I tell you something about left-handedness? And I was going to bring this up, and it's so perfect that you're on now. So I'm right-handed, and 2 weeks ago I ruptured a tendon in my right hand, so I can't use my right hand. Well, what's happening is I'm now forced to use my left hand, so I'm eating slower because I can't eat as well with my left hand, which means that I'm being more mindful. And just by using my left hand, I've lost 2 pounds in the last 2 weeks. I don't need to lose weight, but just because I have to now pay attention to what I'm doing, I'm losing weight. Isn't that crazy?
It's not worth it to keep eating. I'm already tired.
Exactly. It's like it's so hard to do everything. I don't know how lefties do it. I was reading something about you today, and I'm just going to read this paragraph because but it says, having been referred to as the Sherlock Holmes of food, I love that, in the Wizard of Wine, Brian
The
Wansink.
Wizard of Why?
Yeah, that's what it said. I love that. And it said, Brian Wansink and his food and brand lab have been credited with improving the deeper scientific understanding of food eating and food shopping. A fundamental finding is that our environment, such as the way a food is labeled, presented, stored, or served, biases our eating habits and taste preferences. A large part of eating less and eating better, he argues, involves making small changes to our homes, to the daily mindless patterns of our lives. In underscoring this, the first and last sentence of his book, Mindless Eating, states, the best diet is the one you don't know you're on. I thought that was brilliant. I loved that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think my mom wrote that. I think. No,
but,
okay.
But you
Yeah,
talk about environment. Environment is so important.
yeah. What's interesting about that, and my first book was titled Mindless Eating. The new one's Slim by Design. But in the first book, what I kind of looked at was why we mindlessly eat and how to solve it. And it was interesting that back when that came out, and actually subsequent to that, I might be talking to a reporter or on a radio show or something, and somebody kind of would say, almost mindlessly, they'd say, "So, the secret to mindless eating must be mindful eating."
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no. I mean, that works for 5% of the population, but for the other 95% of us, our lives are just too doggone crazy to, cut a pea in half and kind of say, "Am I full yet? Am I full yet?" No, because I mean, we you work all day, come home with a to-do list that has 9 things on it. The kids are screaming and turning feral. I mean, who has the time to eat a pea like that? And for us, it's much. The solution ends up being not mindful eating, but simply changing our environment. So
Right.
it mindlessly leads us to eat less, but without thinking about it.
Well, especially in your second book, Slim by Design, you talk about just how important the environment really is, because it's causing a lot of us to overeat.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can you can tell this to people. You can say, "Hey, look, your cluttered kitchen. If you're snacking 44% more, if you have snacks spread throughout your kitchen like most of us do,
Mm-hmm.
like in 5 cupboards on average, you're snacking about a third more than you do if all those are in one cupboard and sort of in one inconvenient cupboard." And so there's all these solutions. But what's interesting is that you can tell people these things that work for all of us, and people will say they kind of view them like life hacks. They kind of go, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's oh yeah, yeah," and they either say that never happens to me, or they say, "Yeah, yeah, I should change it sometime," but they don't. And so one of the things that we started doing a short time ago, and it works incredibly well in helping people change things for themselves for the better, is we would give people scorecards for, a scorecard for their home or for their favorite restaurant or for their workplace. But we give them a scorecard, and we'd say, okay, here, fill the scorecard out because it's going to tell you whether your home is making you heavy by design or whether it's making you healthy by design, whether it's making you fat by design or slim by design. And it people would go through and they'd fill out a scorecard, and it'd say, hey, if your counters are clear and not cluttered, give yourself a point. Hey, if all your snacks are in one cupboard, that's inconvenient, give yourself another point. And it became a powerful way for people to say, holy cow, out of 100 points, I got a 29? Man, there's a lot I can do differently.
Mm-hmm.
And we found this was tremendously motivating for people to
Is
be able
that
to do that.
is that in your book? Is that test in the book? We can all take this test.
Yeah, Yeah,
Yeah.
it's in chapter 2. The one for the home is in chapter 2 of the book. And then there's also a really abbreviated one. It's only 10 questions long. That's on the website slimbydesign.org.
So that's great. And so if people want to find out more about your work, they should go to slimbydesign.org. That would be the best place to.
Yeah, that would be another place where they can get they can get a taste of things that way.
Yeah, a taste of things. I love that.
Yeah.
It's so funny because environment. You know, I remember about 14 years ago, I bought my husband a recliner, a Lazy Boy, for his 40th birthday, and we still have it. And it's a very comfortable chair, and he loves it. And now you can actually buy recliners with built-in refrigerators, so that people don't even have to get up and walk to the fridge to get a beer or a soda. So that's an example of how the environment is not as favorable, right?
Oh.
That's funny. But
That is wonderful.
it's they don't even have to get up anymore.
There's a cool thing we discovered. And this bodes well for your husband and his new cooler recliner that you're buying for his 54th birthday. And that we did this study a while back. We had people watch this really super exciting movie on TV, like action scenes and crashes and all this sort of stuff. We're gonna watch this really boring talk show, okay? And we put all these snacks in front of people, and we found healthy snacks and unhealthy snacks. And we found that regardless of what food we put in front of people, they ate nearly twice as much food if they're watching an action movie or an exciting TV show than if they're watching something that was boring. It's just almost like you ate to the pace of the movie. And so this came out like in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and when it came out, I was talking to this a reporter, and they said, well, it just says that you should never watch action movies while you're with food in front of you. It's like, no, I mean, what this tells me is that if you want your husband in the great easy chair to eat a whole lot more cut up vegetables or cut up fruit, the way to do it is just give him that while he's watching an action movie, because they even eat twice as much of the healthy stuff. They eat twice as much of everything.
That's fantastic. Or if you don't want to eat it all, just watch PBS. No, so
actually, that's right. Actually, the show we were using was a Charlie Rose show, and he was interviewing somebody that none of us had even heard of. So it was
and before you get all mad at me, I was just kidding. Downton Abbey's my favorite show, but I joke. The studies that you mentioned in Mindless Eating, some of them are so bizarre and so interesting. And one of my favorite ones, because I'm a big fan of movies, and the one with the popcorn, where they were given, even though it was stale, they ate it. And do you think the fact that when things are free, people will eat them even if they don't want them and even if they're not hungry?
Yeah, and one of the things that goes on, we think there's some very deep things that go on about free food that don't kind of curse us quite as much as if we paid for food. Because if we paid for food, we kind of know it's ours. It's our property right thing. No one's going to take it. But free food, there's a competition for free food. And what we think goes on, and we've done a ton of studies with free food, and we find that people do view free food a little bit differently. But it's almost as if your inner caveman, regardless of whether you make $200,000 a year or whatever, your inner caveman comes out when there's free food, and you're like, I'm competing with other people for this scarce resource.
Yeah, that's like Costco. I mean, do you ever go to Costco?
All the time.
I mean,
actually, this is terrible. But the typical thing on Sundays after church is we end up either going to Taco Bell with my 3 girls, or we go to Costco to eat their free samples. And I thought, there's just something very strange about this being a Sunday ritual. But
I mean, people will trample each other for a free weenie at Costco.
Oh my God, it's crazy. That's crazy.
And it's funny because I travel full time in my job, so I'm on a different plane every week to a different city. And in the old days, you used to get served meals on an airplane, and the food was disgusting, but people still ate it. And I think there's something to this free thing.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I travel. I travel a lot internationally too, and I don't think I've ever left any food untouched.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, it's funny. I love to go back to the idea of the movie theater because our guest last week was a food addiction expert, Dr. Joan Iflin, and she was talking about how for people, especially that are food addicts, movie theaters can be extremely triggering. And I'm in the Screen Actors Guild. I was an actor many years ago.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. I've been on the Tonight Show. I've done a lot of fun stuff.
Woo! Neat.
I'll send you. Give me your address after the show offline. I'll send you a copy of that. But anyway, so because I'm in the Screen Actors Guild, I see a lot of movies at the Directors Guild, and at this particular beautiful theater, comfortable seats, big screen, and you are not allowed to have food, not even water. They actually check your purses and backpacks. You cannot have anything in this theater. There's not even gum chewing. And so I get used to that. But then I go to the regular theater where, there's pizza and popcorn and not even very good popcorn and everything you can imagine and oversized drinks. And I do think that, like you say, the environment, because let's put it this way, if you're going to a 10 o'clock show, unless you didn't eat all day, you can't really be hungry. But there is something, the smells, the sights that make people eat in movies. And I think in a way it's kind of weird to be sitting there in the dark for 2 hours and eat.
It's almost like going to the state fair or something.
So, I mean, in the old days, we were born the same year, but is there somebody older to ask? Because in the old days, I wonder if this was even a thing of eating in movies. And even if we did, the sizes. I mean, look at how, this is another thing I love about your work. You talked about, just moving from a 12-inch diameter plate to a 10-inch diameter plate leads people to serve and eat 22% less. Well, in the old days, the sizes of the soft drinks and the popcorn were not the sizes that were being offered today.
That's exactly right. In fact, what we've seen even since 1960, which let's say roughly 50 years ago, what we've seen is the average size of plates has gone from 9.25 inches up to where it's a little over 11.5 inches right now, just in 50 years' time. So, and when we did that research about the plate size and found that this both plate and bowl size so dramatically influenced how much people ate.
What would be the ideal plate size if somebody was trying to lose weight? Like, do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, well, it depends on a lot of things. It depends on like the verge line. It depends on whether the ridge is colored and stuff. But generally speaking, between 9 and 10 inches. The problem with below 9 inches, particularly if you're a male, you drop below 9 inches and you kind of go, wait a minute, something weird's going on. And then you realize you're fooling yourself, so you tend to go back for seconds and thirds.
So that could work against you if the plate is actually too small. Then.
Yeah, it backfires. Now it can go as low as about 8 inches for women, but for guys, you get below 9 inches, and we're like, well, this is weird. This is just downright odd.
So maybe we have to have different sizes for different family members then.
Well, I mean, or just keep them all between 9 and 10. Yeah.
You said a person will eat an average of 92% of any food they serve themselves. So are you saying it's better to have other people serve and plate your food if you're trying to eat less, or
no? Then things get a little bit weird. We don't eat quite as much food as somebody else plates ourselves. But usually, once we're over the age of 7, that doesn't happen a whole lot unless we're being served in a restaurant. Unless like we were at a dinner party and somebody pre-plates things. Because once somebody else pre-plates things, all bets are off. We don't feel like we're under the pressure to eat everything we serve ourselves. But the problem with when we serve ourselves, the reason, and we've done these studies in America, Taiwan, Finland, and in those 3 countries, the typical person eats 92% of what they serve themselves. Partly because we're fairly well calibrated to know kind of how much we think we want, and we kind of know that at this stage in life, that we hate eggplant, so we don't serve eggplant, or that we really like X, so we do serve X. But there's also, I think, what goes on in the back of an adult's mind is they say, if I serve it and I leave a lot, I'm kind of saying I was an idiot to begin with, aren't I? Yeah. And it's what's interesting is that it plagues adults, but it doesn't plague little gooblets and kids. So we did the same study, and this is tremendously liberating for anybody out there who's got kids and who's ever said, "Finish your food or clean your plate," which, well, I do all the time. But one thing we found out when we did the same study, we looked at meals that about 300 or 400 kids ate. We looked at when they were not around their parents, they only ended up eating about 60% of the food they served themselves. These are elementary age kids. And you kind of go, what's the deal? Why is it that no kid finishes their plate when they serve themselves? And what it is that unlike us, they don't really know how hungry they are and how much it's going to take to fill up their little tummies. And second, they don't know what they like, what they don't like. And, they don't know that they don't like eggplant. So they serve themselves eggplant, and they taste, and they kind of go, I don't like it. And I mean, it was when we first discovered this research. Like we got about 20 researchers in my lab, and within a bunch of us have kids. And within 2 days of discovering this, about all of us changed the way we feed our kids because we realized that wait a minute, it's normal for a little kid to not eat everything in their plate.
But so many kids, or at least I know I was brought up with a father where you take what you want, but you eat everything on your plate because there's children starving in India.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I think it's China in my household. Yeah.
Yeah, one of those countries. So that's I don't think people should have to finish what's on their plate. If they're full.
No. Yeah.
Right.
You're exactly right. But even then, I mean, I've done this research for 20 years. It was 25 years that it was seeing that and saying, holy cow, the typical kid doesn't eat. So it's not just my weirdo 3 girls. It's all kids, and it's tremendously liberating for parents to realize that there's not something aberrant about their kid who eats 2/3 of their plate.
I also notice I work a lot with people. I teach a weight loss lifestyle program in Los Angeles, and I notice that people that are naturally slim, like my husband, who's always been slim and never had a problem. He doesn't always finish what's on his plate, but I notice that overweight people tend to always finish what's on their plate.
Yeah, and I think there's some different thinking behind part of that, and I wonder how much kind of goes back to when they're younger and the word plate. But we're doing something interesting, and this was a spin-off of Slim by Design in the book, and that when writing the book, I realized we all know people who've been heavy and who've lost weight, and that's pretty cool. But what we don't really know, and we know their tips because they're generous to share those with us and stuff. But what we don't know is all these friends we have who are naturally skinny, they're naturally slim, and they've been that way all their life. Maybe they got pregnant or something, but even then the day after they had the baby, they were back down to their whatever marathon weight or whatever. But what is it that these people know that the rest of us don't know? And so it's interesting. We started this new project, and just this last summer, it's called the Slim by Design Registry. That if people have been slim all their life and they want to share some of their secrets, that'd be cool. So what we've done is we figured out questions to ask these people. What is it that you do when you go to a barbecue that most people don't do? Things like this, to try to get at some of the kind of almost unknowing secrets they have about this. So
that sounds fascinating. Can you share one of these unknowing secrets that Splendor?
Yeah, sure. So we've actually just started this. Now, if anybody has been slim all their life, there's a little pre-questionnaire there, and if you qualify for the registry, then it'll ask you a whole bunch more questions, and we'll give you tips and stuff. But it's Slim by Design Registry.org. But it's interesting that when we ask people, I'll use the example of a barbecue because it was game weekend this last weekend, and so I talked to all these friends that went these games. But one thing we found is that when you ask people, hey, what do you think it is that you do, for instance, when you go to a barbecue that most people don't, or to a tailgating? One thing that people would say is they'd say something like, well, a barbecue, or it's all about the meat, And so what I do is I just go there and that's all I eat is meat. I don't eat any bread. I don't eat any buns. I don't eat any chips. If it's about the meat, I'm going to go and enjoy the meat and not the other stuff. And someone else will say, I love going to barbecues, but I make it a point to not eat anything unless it was, homemade or home prepared. Or and they all have these little bitty almost food rules that aren't restricting them. They don't say never ever ever eat a dessert, but they're just saying, hey, here's what I do when I go there. Um, and one person said, well, I always go, but I limit myself. I always get a dessert, but I just limit myself to one. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't
So
do that.
it
I
sounds
limit
like
myself.
it sounds like almost like they sort of know what they're doing before they do it. They have a game plan, so to speak. They just don't go in and like hope for the best.
Yeah, but what's interesting about this is it's not like a mindful eating strategy where they kind of like are walking tentatively around, kind of reciting some chant that reminds them of what to do. They just have these simple things that they followed all their life as it become natural. And so it's kind of interesting. One of the examples or one of the studies that I open with in the new book Slim by Design is this thing about buffets and that.
Oh,
Um,
that was going to be my next question. I had so many questions about buffets. I'm so glad you touched on it.
well, I mean, and but it's interesting because it illustrates what slim people do that most other people don't, and that I'm not sure about. I live in California for 5.5 years. I know there's all sorts of unusual sorts of um, you know. Ideas or ordinances that get suggested. I don't know if they've suggested this, but they have in New York. They've suggested an ordinance to ban all-you-can-eat buffets, or to zone them outside of town, because they just make people fat. And if you go to many buffets, and I go to a ton of them, what you realize is no, at least a third of the people at any buffet are really, really skinny. And but if you're asked these people and you say, hey, what is it that you do here at this buffet that heavy people don't? You get one of two answers. People either say, I don't know, or they say, maybe I eat less.
Mm.
But you can watch what they do. And so one of the things we did is we went to about I think 11 Chinese buffets across the nation. There was one in San Francisco, and across the nation, and we watched about 300 people from the minute they came in, and we coded what time they came in, who they were with, where they sat, how many times they dropped their fork. I mean, every time, everything, to see if we could figure out what it is that skinny people do differently. And it's interesting. One of the things that we found is that, first of all, skinny people tend to sit about 16 feet farther away from the buffet than the heavy person does. They're about 3 times as likely to face away from the food, whereas a lot of heavy people face directly toward the food. And they're more likely to use chopsticks, like 7 times more likely to use chopsticks, about 8 times more likely to use a smaller plate if there are 2 sizes of plates available. And the last thing they do is when they serve themselves, they tend to survey or scout out the buffet before they pick up their plate, whereas I'd say about 71% of skinny people scout out the buffet. In contrast, that about 76% of heavy people do just the opposite.
Mm.
They go right for the plate and then start looking at the food and saying, do I want that? Do I want that? Do I want that? And but the crazy thing is, when we intercept people like in the parking lot after staring at them for an hour, we ask questions like, hey, "Why do you think you sat so far away from the buffet?" It's crazy. People say, "Really? I don't know. I didn't really pay any attention to where I did sit." And it gets at this idea that a lot of the reason slim people are slim is they're slim by design. They've come up with certain ways to change their environment or their behavior in these environments so they can mindlessly eat less without thinking about it.
That's so interesting because in your book, Slim by Design, you have this chart, like at a restaurant, it's showing that different seats you're actually going to eat more, whether you're by the kitchen or whether you're by the bar, whether you're by the bathroom. And a lot of times we don't have a choice, Brian. If we're at a fancy restaurant, they'll just seat us with the first table that becomes available. But it's so interesting to know that if you have a choice, we should take this chart with us so that we can sit there. I was going to ask you about buffets because I am not slim by design. I'm slim by a lot of hard work in the
Yeah.
past years because I was obese and now I've been slender for a while. And I find that buffets can really be problematic because while I'll really never overeat at home, when you have that many choices, I find that even if I were to take a small portion of everything, I'm going to be overeating. And so I'm pleased to know that one of my new strategies is something that the naturally slim people do is now when I'm forced in a buffet situation, I do scout it out. So I literally look at every choice first, and then I go a step further and I go to people who've already gone and I say, what were the three best dishes here? And then
Oh,
and
great
then
idea. Great
because
idea.
the truth is if there's 20 dishes or 40 dishes, they're all not going to be A-plus dishes. And so I don't need like a Jello salad with marshmallow or something that's just not good. So I'll look at every dish. I'll use my eyes. I'll use my nose, and then I'll go to the people in the environment because and then I'll say, hey, what were your three favorite things? And then I'll just focus in and really enjoy what the best ones were rather than just having rather than skimpy portions of things that really are not that good.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think that's going to work really, really well.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to contribute. So, you had mentioned that the average person makes in excess of 250 decisions about food each day. I found that mind boggling because maybe I'm having thoughts that I'm not aware of, but I tend to mostly think about food when I'm hungry or when I'm planning meals. And I try not to watch
Yeah.
television or at least television with commercials because I know that that can influence our eating behavior. But 250, that sounds like a lot of decisions.
Yeah, what's crazy is that if you were to ask most people how many decisions they make about food a day, most people would say between 25 and 35 on average, Americans anyway. But what happens is because they say, yeah, because I make that decision between Super Sugar Crisps and Fruit Loops in the morning. Yep, that's a big decision. That's one. I got one. But in reality, what happens is that they make a decision, yeah, about which cereal, but then they make a decision about how much to pour, whether to have seconds, whether to finish it all, how much milk to put in, whether they drink the milk. And so as a result, there's all these little bitty decisions related to quantities and stuff that you make that you're not even aware of. But then also during the day, there's tons of decisions. Like every time you see a candy dish on your desk, and you
Oh,
kind of go, and you see it and you say,
your
every time you
book your book held so much with that. Not so much for me, but some of my clients who were forced to keep candy because they worked for, somebody that made them have it for clients. And I remember reading in your book how that the placement of the candy dish with these secretaries or administrative assistants made a difference on how much they'd eat. So that if it was, on their desk, they'd eat more than if it was a few feet away on a filing cabinet, or if it was a dark colored candy dish, they eat less than if it was a clear. Those little things are things that people can do to change their environment. They're brilliant.
they work so well because they end up cutting by half how much you eat. If you move your candy dish just 6 feet off your desk, it gets cut by half. And when we did the study, at the time as a professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana, Champaign, and we took all these secretaries that had won like secretarial awards, and we said we're going to give you free chocolate for a month. And we'd give them these candy dishes, and then every night after they left, we'd go count how many candies they would eat and then fill it back up. And we found that it's just simply having a candy 6 feet from your desk cut how much you ate from about 225 calories a day to down to about 100 calories a day, which over the course of a year would be about 8 pounds difference.
That's right.
But,
It can make
but
a big difference.
yeah, but when we asked people, why do you think you ate so much less from 6 feet away? Nobody said, well, because, geez, 6 feet, that's a long ways to walk. No, they said, no, that 6 feet gives me pause to ask myself, am I really that hungry? But the thing is, when the candy dish is on your desk, every time you look at it, you have to make a yes or no decision. And you might say no the first 26 times, but the 27th time you kind of go maybe, and then 28th times, I've been a good person all day, let me take one. And it's those 27 decisions, even when you say no, that also contribute to this total of about 250 decisions you make a day. It's just that they were decisions to not eat food, but you still had to, for a very split second, make a decision. Do you reach in or do you not?
I could see how those 6 feet could make a difference, Brian, because I know for me, one of my biggest problems when I was overweight, it was nuts, eating nuts. And because I'm also a chef and I have to use them sometimes for clients, I found that putting them in a very high cabinet that required me getting on a step stool made a big difference. Because when I open the cabinet and it's an eye line, it's a lot harder to resist than if it's way up high and I have to actually go to the closet, take a step stool, get on the step stool, climb on the step stool.
Well, and do you think it also influenced you that they were nuts and you kind of had the perception they're kind of healthy and they're kind of natural?
Exactly. I mean, I thought they were good for me. Research shows they were good for me, and maybe if I could eat an ounce a day, they would have been good for me. But I was eating a lot more because they're just so delicious.
Yeah. We did this really cool study, and that has a nice kind of insight, I guess, about this. And that we call it the Syracuse study because we went to 230 households in Syracuse, New York, and we photographed everything in their kitchen, in their living room, and dining room. Like everything in their drawers, everything in their refrigerator and freezer, everything. And then we weighed them because we wanted to see if just by looking at pictures you could predict how much somebody weighs.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Well, yeah, I talk about I talk about in chapter 2 in Slim by Design about the household makeover. But one of the things we found is that one huge predictor is how much somebody's going to weigh is the food in their kitchen. And so if you have chips or cookies sitting
on the counter,
yeah, what's going to happen is on average you're going to weigh about 10 pounds more than your neighbor. Okay, but what's interesting is what happens if you have candy sitting out or if you have breakfast cereal sitting out. Because, breakfast cereal, it's healthy, it's got the vitamins and minerals and stuff. But we found that if breakfast cereal's sitting visible anywhere in the kitchen, the person on average is going to weigh 21 pounds more than their neighbor.
Just from breakfast.
21 pounds more. And then we found that if they have candy sitting out, they're only going to weigh 3 pounds more than their neighbor. And that doesn't make sense. It seems like it should be the other way around.
Yeah, I would think so.
Well, but what we ended up finding is that when candy's sitting out, people are hyper vigilant. They're like, no, that bad stuff. They walk by and they shake their finger at it. But you don't do that with breakfast cereal because breakfast cereal looks healthy. The person on the box is kind of skinny and smiling, and you don't see there anything wrong really with grabbing that third or fourth or fifth handful every day. But that's what seems to really add up.
That is so interesting. What do you think the influence of like television commercials are, especially when the unhealthy products are marketed towards children?
Yeah, I think they're a whole lot less influential than we think they are. And it was interesting. We do tons of work in schools. So we started this thing called the Smarter Lunchroom Movement, which it's in about 20,000 U.S. schools where we say, look, you can change the laws. What you can also do is you can move the fruit bowl next to the cash register, and the kids are going to take twice as much. You don't have to make them take fruit. I mean, you can put white milk in the front of the milk cabinet, not in the back, and kids are going to take 38% more.
Cool.
So the idea is giving schools these easy tools that they can do to move kids and to pick up an apple instead of a cookie in an easy way. And one of the things we did is there's a lot of people who say, can't be any branding in schools because it's just evil. It's bad stuff to market. But we did this series of studies where we took brands and like a Elmo, there's like that little Ask Elmo is like a little character that kids for some reason, I don't know, kind of find attractive. And we put these little Elmo branded stickers. I think Sesame Seed owns the brand to them, and they let us do this. But we put them on wrapped cookies or we put them on bags of carrots. And one of the things we find is that if you brand or you market something really tasty like cookies, it doesn't really do that much because every kid wants the cookies anyway. And so
yeah,
the percent of kids who took it went from, I don't know, 71 to 72%. I mean, it really no difference at all. But when you put the same thing on this poor pack of boring carrots, the percentage of kids who took it almost tripled. Because the boar carrots don't have anything really going for it other than kind of an orange color, and so having this really made it much more attractive and enticing, and it really changed the way I kind of view kind of the potential of marketing and branding when it comes to healthy foods. They just do a really bad job of it.
It just seems like the people that sell the fruits and vegetables don't have the same kind of budgets as the people that sell the sugary processed treats.
Yeah, they do, and then that's one reason I'm really kind of heartened by some of the cool things that's been going on with it's actually a California manufacturer of a lot of carrots and things like this. It's a big enough. It's one of the two biggest distributors or I guess marketers of carrots that they can kind of afford to advertise and make packaging a little bit sassier and more attention getting, and I'm really encouraged when I see those things happen.
How do you feel about documentaries like Fed Up that talk about sugar being such a problem, especially for children, being addictive, and what do you think about things like that?
Yeah, I for over 20 years, I've never had a TV set, and I don't even watch movies very much. So I don't.
Wait a second. In your bio here, it says that you love horror movies.
Oh, I do. Yeah, but if I'm going to see a movie, it's certainly not going to be a documentary. It's going to be something that really gets me jazzed up. Yeah. Yeah. I've been in a bunch of documentaries, and I've never seen. I saw one of them, like Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, and that's the only one I went to because the guy wanted me to come to the opening night preview or whatever it was. So
right.
I haven't seen the movies and videos I'm in. Yeah.
That's interesting. One of the studies, one of the things you say is that low-fat labels lead people to eat 16 to 23% more calories.
Yeah, and with some foods it's even more than that because what goes on with low-fat labels is you kind of go, yeah, low-fat, I'm going to eat it up. Well, two things are happening. First, they do take the fat out, but they don't take all the calories out because they add sugar back in.
Yes.
And so we find the typical snack food that's low fat, on average has only 11% fewer calories than its regular counterpart. But then what we also find is because people think they're being a good boy or they think they're being a good girl by eating this flavorless cookie, they end up eating more of them.
It gives them a license to overeat because they feel it's lower in calories.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And so the thing is that again, everything all of our studies here at the Cornell Food and Brand Lab are set up to give people a tool that they can use. And so once we find out what goes in the studies, almost everybody in the lab will change what we do within 2 days. So once that came out, I'm like, well, forget this low-fat stuff. We're never going to have any more low-fat ice cream in this place again.
Interesting. I find that labels can be. I'm the author of a book called Unprocessed, and so my whole thing is to eat foods without labels, ideally. And one of the studies that I loved in your book, Mindless Eating. I want to change it to Mindful Eating. The sequel was the one done with wine, where you had these crazy labels like from wineries that didn't exist, and that you could have had the absolute best and most expensive wine in that bottle. This is why I think it's almost such a crock, Brian, the way these people claim to be wine connoisseurs, because you had some of the best wines in the world, but when you had weird names for labels of weird wineries that didn't exist, they didn't drink it. But yet you might have had inferior wine with beautiful labels, and they loved it.
But and the funny thing about that, I'll tell you the genesis of the thing, and I'll tell you that one of my favorite wine things too is that my wife went to culinary school over in Paris at Le Cordon Bleu, and
oh, neat.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And at one point, she wanted to take this wine tasting course with these French sommeliers and stuff, and it's become the first third of that sommelier thing. So we took this, and I think at that time both of us thought that 95% of wine tasting was kind of in the mind, and that it's kind of subjective. But man, you take some of those courses, and it's just like, no, these are all really, really, really amazing, great wines. So you notice that there was a difference. But when we got back, we thought the typical person maybe has a different experience with wine. So we have this research restaurant, and it's pretty cool. And if you're ever out here, I'll show it to you. But it's only open one day a week.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's only open on Thursday nights. And so people come, they'll pay $20 or $25 depending on what the stuff is for the night, the menu. It's a prefix meal. And one night they came and we took this really inexpensive wine. It's $2 wine called Charles.
$2
Yeah.
Chuck.
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah, $2 Czech wine.
People love that wine. I mean, when they don't know that it was $2, they love it.
Yeah. Well, that's what we do. We soaked the label off. We put a label on that said it was this from this new winery in California, a place known for wine, or he said it's from this new winery in North Dakota, a place not known for wine. And my grandma's from North Dakota. It's the last 50th state to produce wine commercially, so we used that. And we didn't care what people thought about the wine because we knew from a prior study that they would think the California wine tasted great, even though it was the same, just because it had the California label. But what we want to know is would it either, provide a halo or a shadow to the rest of the meal. And if people thought they're drinking North Dakota wine, I mean, if they thought they're drinking California wine, they loved the wine, they loved the meal, they made reservations to come back. If they thought they were drinking North Dakota wine, they didn't like the wine very much, they didn't like the meal very much, and they ate faster and just got out. And when we asked people if they wanted to come back, make reservations to come back, most people said no. And one guy even says, no, he says, I'm really busy for the rest of my life.
Oh my gosh. It just shows that a rose by any other name doesn't always smell as sweet. That what we call something makes a big difference in food. I worked in a restaurant as an executive pastry chef for 4 years, and how you label stuff on the menu can make a difference between whether you sell it or not. People really, respond to things like that, to the different words that you call things.
Yeah, no, we've done a number of studies, and I mentioned these a little bit in the first book, Mindless Eating, but then I mentioned how you can decode menus in the new book, Slim by Design, because we found that simply when we went into a restaurant and simply added one descriptive word or one or two, like instead of calling something seafood fillet, we called it succulent Italian seafood fillet. Sales went up 27%. People liked it more. They thought the restaurant was snappier and up to date, and they even rated the chef as being more having more culinary training. But the power of tapping in these expectations is something that we can all use as cooks. And if somebody comes to your house for dinner and you say, here's some food, eat. They're probably going to eat it and they're going to be grateful. But if you say, hey, here's what we're having first. This first dish is a pasta dish. It's here's how it was made, and here's some things that are in it. A little bit of a description really changes people's perception of their expectation of how good it's going to taste, but also their interpretation. And we have tons of dinner parties here in my house, and my wife, even though she graduated in the top 10% of Le Cordon Bleu, would make stuff, and people would go, yeah, that's pretty good, But at some point after we did this research, before we start dinner, I say, "Oh, can you tell us a little bit about what we're having?" And she'd say, "Yeah," and she'd use a lot of French words and blah 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 blah. And once she did that, then people cannot shut up about commenting about the food. I mean, even weeks later, we'll see people and they'll talk about the food.
Interesting.
The power of expectations.
Yeah, we all need to learn French apparently. So
no, I guess she could have anything. She would just use descriptive words.
Right. Or use more adjectives.
Yeah.
We had a few questions. Lindsay wanted to know that what study from your work surprised you the most?
That's a really good question. I think that what happens is that I just think over the last 25 years, we've probably done maybe about 1,200 studies. And what I find shocking is that in many of these studies, when we show somebody that something influenced them, like that they poured a whole lot more into that they poured more vodka into a tumbler than into a highball glass, or that they poured, more, red wine into one glass than another, or that the lighting influenced them, or whatever. People, about 94% of people will say, no, it didn't influence me. 6% will say, wow, yeah, maybe I did. I wouldn't have thought that, though. But 94% of people say, no, I don't believe it. Nope, I didn't. It didn't happen to me. Or if I did it, it wasn't because of the glass. It was because tonight I was just I'm tired. Yeah. And out of those 94%, about a third of them will say, but I can see how it would influence other people. But still, 2/3 of it, about 60% of everybody, don't think it could influence them or anybody else, and that's why these things have such a huge impact. I mean, the reason I mentioned the thing about glasses is that we found that when you pour anything into a short wide glass versus a tall skinny glass, the same volume, you pour a whole lot more into the short wide glass because you don't look at the width, you just look at how tall it is from the table. And so we actually went to all 86 Philadelphia bartenders and had them pour how much liquor they'd pour into like a gin and tonic or a whiskey on the rocks or whatever. And these bartenders, professional bartenders, poured 30% more liquor in every short wide glass. And when we show them, we say, hey, it happens to everybody. So why don't you try it again? What happened less than 2 minutes later is they still poured more in these short wide glasses because it's so hardwired that we can't. That's why we can't be, we can't become slim by mindfulness. No, it's easier to become slim by design. You change the shape of the glasses, you never have to worry about it.
So, we have an obesity epidemic in this country. 2/3 and probably even more now, Americans are overweight. Half of those are obese. What strategies of all the tips and tricks you give in Slim by Design or even in your first book could people implement immediately? So we know about changing the size of our tableware is one.
Yeah, well, the first thing that you need to do, I think it's in a lot of like turnaround programs, is you need to realize that there's a problem, that there's something that's not working quite right for you. And the easiest way to do this is I just simply go to the website slimbydesign.org and fill out the scorecard for your home to find out whether your home is making you fat by design or slim by design, whether it's making you healthy or heavy. Because simply answering those 10 questions, you'll get a score between 0 and 10, and you can see how you do compared to other people, is enough to give people a wake-up call saying, wait a minute, I get a 3 out of 10, but if I serve my entree and the starch for my meal from the counter, from the stove, I can go to a 4 out of 10? Well, I can do that. And you mean if I unclutter my kitchen, I can go to a 5 out of 10? Well, I can do that. And it's at that point that it gives people the aha. But it's only saying, wait a minute, I get a 3 or 4 out of 10. So I did the grand rounds for Johns Hopkins a short time ago. And this is the cardiology department. In the cardiology department, out of 10 up to 10 points, the average person there was getting a 3. So there's a lot of easy changes that a person can make overnight that can turn things around for you for the better.
So
and I just encourage you to just go to that website, slimbydesign.org. And
if you took the test right now, what would you get on the nutritional scorecard? Because I'm going to take this test the second.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. So there's a 100-question scorecard in the back of in the back of every chapter, for homes, and there's a different one for grocery stores and your workplace and stuff. And out of the 100-point scorecard, the big daddy, I get about an 82. Depending on the day, it ranges from maybe like about a 80 to an 84. but because nobody's going to do perfect. Like one of the things we find is that, yeah, one of the things is, hey, get rid of your microwave. Get rid of your microwave, you get an extra point. But nobody in their right mind is going to get rid of their microwave.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, in fact, it was interesting. I was able to convince my wife to move ours into an adjacent laundry room, and that helps a lot. But some things you're just not willing to change. The color of your kitchen. Most people are going to say, "Wow, I'll get another point, and on average, I'll eat 3% less if I change the color of my kitchen." No, no woman or man in their right mind is going to say, "Yeah, whatever. The heck with the decor. I'm going to go with, you know, pumpkin orange."
Because I want 100. Well, even the lighting, you say, the subtle cues in our environment, the lighting, or even our choice of companion can influence us.
Yeah, and it was we did a number of studies. We find that simply how fast your companion eats, it influences or causes you to eat very much. But what happens is that you can't say, okay, I'll just eat by myself for the rest of my life. Instead, it's just easier. It's a whole lot easier to just put other things in place. So if you're going to be eating faster because you have a companion that eats faster, well, just make sure you're using smaller plates, for instance. So you put less on your plate to begin with, and make sure your serving bowls are not on the table, so that you don't have the temptation to serve yourself seconds or thirds while you match his speed.
Interesting. That is very helpful, because it's just like the 6 feet away from the candy dish. If it's not on the table, again, you have to think about it before you just mindlessly put it on your plate. You actually have to make an effort and get up and go to another room.
Yeah, and now we find that for women, like I said, on average, anything that you serve off your stove or off a counter or off a serving table or whatever, you're going to eat on average about 20% less of than anything that's sitting in front of you. But it's different for women than it is for guys. The typical guy is going to eat about 30% less, whereas the typical woman's only going to eat on average, about 10% less.
Wow. This is so cool that you've studied so many things, and I bet there's so many more things you're going to be studying. So this is an evolving field.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate that a lot of this gets really widely embraced by people, by chefs like you, by schools, by work sites. We did transformations of all the Google cafeterias, and we're doing them for the Department of Defense, all the Army bases. Just making changes even in cafeterias and in PXs and in snack bars, so that people will naturally be more likely to pick up an apple than a candy bar. And
so cool. Now, if you could only improve like the food in the hospitals and the nursing.
Oh, actually, we're doing a big project, and I'm actually launching this with Stanford out in California, where we were coming up with a scorecard for hospital food services and hospital cafeterias. It's not aimed at changing the food, but what it's aimed at is guiding the families that are there and the people who work in the hospital to pick up the healthier stuff that's already offered, but that they just walk by or dismiss.
Wow. Well, you've made me want to go out and buy some Elmo stickers for all my kids.
What is it with that silly thing? To me, it's actually kind of spooky looking,
Well, Scooby-Doo is my favorite cartoon.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's right. That's right. I think it's Daphne that is my favorite, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, you know why? Because she was the smart one,
And Velma, that's right.
I cannot believe that this hour, Brian, has just flown by. It's just been such a delight to talk to you, and I can just hear in your voice the passion for what you do, and you just make it sound so fun and exciting that everybody just wants to come to your lab, because you seem like you have the greatest job in the world. It's like Disneyland every day, doing these fun experiments that really have some amazing results that can help people, like you say, these subtle cues, these little changes we can make to actually eat less.
Well, should you or any of your listeners, be in the Ithaca area and stop by or give a call, and we'll give you a tour and we'll show you some stuff, and it'll be cool.
I don't know if you know, I actually have my own TV show now, and I've been filming in New York, but not probably too far from Ithaca. But if I ever go back, it'd be great to have you actually on the TV show to talk about some of this, because you're just so fun to talk to. And I thank you so much for being here. I'm such a fan of your work. And remember, go to slimbydesign.org. Everyone, take that test, and we'll talk about it next week on the call, and we'll see who got the best score. Excuse me. So please pick up a copy of Slim by Design and Brian's first book, Mindless Eating. I keep wanting to say Mindful Eating. It's a classic, and I love listening to that. I forgot to talk about one of my favorite, the refillable soup bowl one. That was another one of my favorite, where the tube got was going all over the place. That must have been a lot of fun. That one. That was a fun experiment. So thank you so much, Brian, and thank you all so much for listening. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.